Hello everyone and welcome to the Old-Scale Canadian National Railway's Sanmore Subdivision. Hi folks, Serge Lebel here for the Canadian National Railway's Sanmore Subdivision. This is March 2018 and this is episode number 2. In this episode I got a pretty good lineup. I got my notes here so I don't forget anything. We'll be talking about the layout design. We'll look in that how the layout was designed and the history behind it. We will have a tour of the layout just to show what I've done in the past couple of months as far as progress goes. And at the end of the episode we will have again some trains running. This time it'll be a little bit different. I'll get back to that later. So without further ado, let's get to it. Operations. For most modelers, myself included, this is the reason behind investing all that time and money in building a model railroad. Operations is what brings an otherwise motionless diorama to life. But the foundation for enjoyable operations is to have a good track design. Alright, layout design. To begin with, I'd like to give you a brief history of my experience as an operator. As some of you already know, I am one of those fortunate guys who gets to live out his dream as being a locomotive engineer. I work for the Quebec North Shore and Labrador Railway here on the North Shore of Quebec. And working for the railroad actually impacted quite a lot my design of this layout. The reason behind that is because when you're working on the railroad, you see operations from the inside. So you get a different view of what goes on a railroad, and that kind of changes your optics about building a layout. It kind of changes your focus. Prior to that, I was part of a group way back when I was living in Edmundston, New Brunswick. Those guys will probably recognize themselves. Hi guys. I was part of a group called the Témiscouata Model Railroad Engineers. The story behind that is we were a bunch of guys in Edmundston who had basement size layouts, and we were all modeling each separately, and we decided to get together and have a club based just for operations in a round-robin fashion. So every Friday night we would get together and operate trains, and that was a lot of fun. And that led me to building a couple of layouts, basement-size layouts designed for operations. So that gave me the backbone I needed to get this thing designed here. Now, in designing this layout, one of the givens that I was very fortunate to deal with is the fact that I had a 32 feet by 58 feet room basement that's totally unobstructed. When I designed the house, I mentioned to the contractor that I did not want the electrical panel downstairs, and I did not want the hot water heater downstairs. To me, that made sense for the layout and also for practical purposes. And in addition to that, I have enough space upstairs for my workshop, so that frees up the entire layout. Now, in terms of design characteristics, the layout was designed around the idea of a sincere linear track plan which means that the track plan is not a continuous loop. It's from point to point, and the train goes through the scene only once. There's just one track that goes through the scene at a time. Let's see here, layout design. I focused more on operation versus scenery. Of course, scenery is important. It's nice to have good scenery. It brings everything closer to reality. But if something had to give between a scenic feature and an operating feature, of course, operations was where my decision would lean towards. Trains will be mostly freights, way freights. Again, you have to deal with that. If you're designing your layout, you have to know what's going to be the focus of your trains, because that gives you either more mainline, less yards, or more yards, less sidings or spurs, or more industries, less industries. So you have to be focused on one thing and go with that in your design. And my focus or my layout is set in the 2000s. Again, not really makes much of a difference in terms of operations, except for, in my case, it means having operating signals, so longer main lines wherever possible. Okay, now what we are looking at right now is what I call my systems map. It's the mapping for the right-of-way of the Canadian National Railway's Sanmore and Lacroix subdivision. And it's also partly mapping for the Portage subdivision of the Canadian Pacific Railway. Now, word on that, everything that I'm telling you right now is bullcrap. So if you if you look it up on Google, you try to find the Sanmore Sub or any of the locations on my map, chances are you're not gonna find anything, because this is all something that's being made up for the layout. So just a note on that, don't look it up. You're probably not not gonna find much. Now the red line is the Canadian National Railways, like I said, and the run starts at the division point between the East Division and the Maritimes Division, and it runs from Oak Ridge all the way to Chattaway Falls, where there's the junction called Fox Junction, FOCS. Fox Junction, between the Canadian National Railways and the Canadian Pacific Railway. And then the CN moves in a northerly direction all the way to Hazel. Okay, now looking at the track plan, first of all I have to apologize. This is not my original track plan. For some reason this morning I cannot find my track plan. This is a copy of a previous version. There's been a few changes to this plan, but I'll let you know as I go along here. So looking at the track plan, the layout starts here in Oak Ridge, which we saw on the map. Oak Ridge being the division point. So this is where the start of the Sanmore subdivision is. And this is where the dispatch would be located, affectionately known as the Oak Ridge Boys. So this is Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge on my layout is a staging yard. It's probably going to be a scenic staging yard, but it's just a 3-track staging yard. In real life, if it were to exist, it would probably be a whole lot bigger than that. But for all intents and purposes, for the space that I had, this is all I could fit. So moving out of Oak Ridge, we reach Campbellstoke. Now, Campbellstoke is a paper mill spur or yard, if you wish. It's a small yard, and that's the only industry that's in Campbellstoke modeled on the layout. The reason for that is I wanted to have a large enough space dedicated only for the paper mill, because paper mills receive a lot of goods via rail cars, and I felt it was important to try to showcase everything. So the entire wall here will be the mill that will be modeled, and that's about, I'd say about 28 feet long here. And there's another, I'd say about 25 to 28 feet here. That is the receiving yard for the paper mill. This is not a switching yard for the railroad. This is not a place where you would marshal trains. This is where trains come in and leave to and from the paper mill only. Otherwise, you're just using the main line, you're going through it. So that's this area right here. After that, we get to Ellensburg. Now, Ellensburg, one thing I wanted to mention. Yes, the names of the towns are all fictitious. It's all things that I try to come up with. But the industries are named after people that have been important in my life. So the paper mill is named Herelt Papers, and it's named after one of my Uncle John Herelt, who worked all his life in paper mills. So I thought that was very fitting. So moving on, we get to Ellensburg. Now in Ellensburg, there are two industries. Again, for a lack of space, I couldn't fit more. I wanted to have wide open spaces. I didn't want to cram up too much stuff in there. So there's a recycling center that's called Dan's Recycling. That one is named after my brother, Daniel, who actually works in a large recycling center. And there's also Gillis Industries. Gillis Industries will supply the ballast for, they have a ballast rock crusher here, and they will supply the ballast for the railroad. So quite a big player here for the Sanmore subdivision. And again, Gillis is the name of my other brother. So that was named after Gillis. Gillis worked in civil engineering all his life, working on road constructions. So I thought that was very fitting. Moving northwards, I should say, we come across the Maria River, which you saw the bridge on the opening. Well, not really the opening, but in one of the statements there on this video. The bridge is named the Jean-Pierre Réon Memorial Bridge, which was named after a fellow modeler, O-scale modeler, Jean-Pierre Réon, who passed away a few years ago. And the river is named Maria River, which was named after my grandmother, Maria, who was always a big supporter of my railroad endeavors. Moving northerly again, we get to Fox Junction, which is located in Chattaway Falls. Now again, some changes that happened here. First of all, the Clearwater Sub, that's no longer valid because I found out that it really exists. So I didn't want anything that already existed. So that's out. Chattaway Falls is the junction between the Canadian Pacific Railway, which comes from their division point where the Canadian Pacific Railway splits off their main line, and they come to Chattaway Falls to exchange traffic with Canadian National Railways. So this is what you'll see here. A few modifications here and there. The car shop changed a little bit, but not a whole lot. There's a few tracks that are not on the layout here because I didn't have space for them. As much as I try to design everything to scale, sometimes when it gets to fitting everything on the layout, in my opinion, less is more. So I decided to have less tracks and more open space and have a little bit of scenery and stuff here because I didn't want to cram it all. It's nice to have place to run trains, but it's also nice when you have other things around it. So I figured, now I'm not going to overcharge here. Now here the railroad takes a turn as we go across the Chattaway River. And again, we come across a river that's not on my plan here. There's the Suri River right here. So there's a bridge here that I scratch built not long ago. We will see this in the progress report. And then we get to a place called Douglas Cove. Now Douglas Cove, the big change here is that I was supposed to have the rail car ferry on this side here. And this curve here was almost impossible for my locomotives and my cars. It was ridiculously tight. So I decided to move it and have the rail car ferry here instead, and I had a broader curve here. So that made more sense, and it gave me the chance to have a longer car ferry. So the car ferry itself would probably be somewhere around 6 feet long. So I'm thinking about maybe 10 cars for a double track. So that's going to be a nice operating feature also. Now as we move along to Douglas Cove has a bulk oil transfer facility where the bulk oil would come in by ship and be transferred into rail cars to be delivered to the paper mill for the energy for the paper mill. So this is what's seen here, and I'm thinking of modeling here a coal loading facility. I don't have space for the entire mine, but I figured if I could have at least the loading facility, I could have coal trains that would be loaded here and that would be brought to the staging yard. I'm hoping to have live loads in my coal trains, and I'm hoping to have live loads in my wood chip cars also. And this is what we're getting to, going around the area here where I'm hoping to have floor to ceiling scenery. Then we go across another bridge here. So I got still a couple of big bridges to scratch built. We're talking about at least 8 feet for each of these bridges. So those are going to be nice projects. And here we get to a siding called JP. The siding called JP was named after my dear friend JP Sear, who was the drummer in my band when I was playing music. And JP passed away at the age of 42 years old. He was suffering from diabetes. So that area here was named after JP, my dear friend. And in JP there will be, again, there was an addition here, there will be a spur called Smith Logging, where some of the logs for the sawmill will be loaded onto cars and brought to the sawmill. Smith Logging is named after Don Smith of Industrial Model. Don is a good friend of mine, and I wanted to name at least one industry after Don on my layout. Afterwards, we come across a tunnel here because here I had a very tight space and I had a darn post here. So I had to find a way to hide that post. It was in the way. So I figured tunnel was the only way to do this. As we come out of the tunnel, we get to Taganish. And Taganish will be a lumber mill. This is where the wood chips will be loaded into cars, which will be brought to the rotary dumper, which I'm hoping to build, custom build, because my cars are very long cars, so the Lionel dumper wouldn't fit for me. So yeah, loading cars here, live loads, bringing cars here to be unloaded. Taganish is a lumber mill. It's called the Buteau lumber. Again, named after one of my cousins, Robert Buteau, who had a sawmill, a portable sawmill with my dad as a venture when they were a bit younger. And so I figured that was fitting also. Moving on, we get to the other end of the layout, which is going to be maybe a single or hopefully a double track staging yard. This one is called Delos. It's named after my good friend Delos Brown, also known as Ben Brown, who passed away also a few years ago. Ben has been a very big help for me when I started in O-scale. He's been an inspiration for me, so I wanted to have at least one spot on the layout named after Ben. So here it is. Okay, now moving on to the progress that's been made on the layout in the past couple of months. This is one of the items that I wanted to feature. This is a bridge that I scratch built out of styrene and wood, using the Archer decal for the rivets, and a little bit of wood here for the railings. And I also used wood for my bridge pillars here, so with a little bit of woodering can be quite convincing. And if you remember correctly, the last time I was laying the ties here. So all the ties have been laid. They're all been sanded and stained. And a lot of the rail has been put in place so far. Of course, I still have a few spots that needs to be completed. And some folks have asked me about hand-laid track, because not everybody who's watching my videos are mall railroaders, and they were wondering what I was talking about when I was referring to hand-laid track. And what I'm referring to here is hand-laid track is making your own wooden ties, which I made, and made little bags here of 1,000 ties per bag. There's an estimate of 35,000 ties needed to complete this layout. I have about 17,000 ties made, and I'd say about 12,000 ties that are in place already. So I'm coming along pretty good. Now laying the rails, it's a matter of bending the small rail in place and using these little bitty spikes here. Let me see if I can show you here. Look at how small those are. Little bitty spikes. And using these pliers here, I just drive the spikes into the wooden ties and through the cork underneath. And I've made some homemade gauges on my laser engraver, so that keeps everything in perfect gauge while I'm laying the rail in place. As you can see here, I'm up to a switch, so whenever there's a switch that needs to be made, all the rails need to be filed. And again, it's it's a long process just to make one switch. It takes about, I'd say 4 hours to complete a switch. But it's worth it. I mean, this is not something that you can buy off the market. If you want a curve turnout that fits right in place, you have to build it. It's a little bit of the old-fashioned way. I mean, you can buy this stuff. I prefer to build it. I'm in no hurry to finish, and the results is in my opinion much better. Commercial track is made out of plastic and nickel silver, so the plastic ties, they still look like plastic ties even if you weather them. There's nothing like the real wood. So this is a lot of what I've been working on lately, and also I've been working on a little bit more spline here. I didn't put any here because there's going to be a bridge here. I needed to patch the wall here. So here you see the spline in process. Spline sub road bed. It's made out of I'm cutting on the table saw little strips of wood that look like this here. So I make these on the table saw from planks of pine, and I glue them together. This is why there's so many clamps here. So that's in process right here. And as you can see, I've cleaned up all my N scale stuff that I had for sale. I sold 4 locomotives and about 15 cars, so wasn't much of a sale, but that's okay. The rest is going to auction. So that cleaned up the space here for the lumber mill here in Taganish. Now another thing I've been working on that really doesn't show all that much, but it's been a lot of work so far, is trying to set up my detection and signal controls to have animated signals. And as you can see here, I have one OS block that is completed and functional, and I put everything. I have a bungalow here, which is the full-size version of the model bungalow here. So if you look inside this bungalow, you open that up, this is all the what's required for one section, one OS section. For this section right here between the signals, you have the detection cards and all the signal animator cards. This is a system that's designed by a Canadian manufacturer named Circuits for Tracks. It's a very, very good design. It takes a bit of getting used to get started, especially for me, since I'm not really electronically inclined. So I know I have a lot to learn here. But so far, it's working really, really well, and I really like it. Now, having operating signals on the layout is, in my opinion, what makes the operation sessions that much more interesting. In my case, I'm using signals in CTC mode of operation, which means the signals are used for speed restrictions. So I'm not going to go into detail today on the signal operations, but let me just show you very briefly how I set it up and how it works here. Upstairs there will be a dispatcher, and the dispatcher will have control of the controlled locations, which means it will have the control of the turnout and of the signals. Now in this case here, this is the control location number 77. So on the dispatcher's panel, I made a little temporary panel here. This is not what is going to be upstairs. It's going to be much better than this. But here you have your turnout control, which you can turn normal or reverse, and you have your traffic switch, whether you want to prioritize traffic going left or traffic going right, which on my layout is northbound or southbound. So dispatcher would set everything up and hit the send button, and you can hear the turnout motor just activated. And of course that changed the signal here. So if the dispatcher wanted to prioritize traffic in the other direction, he would hit the traffic switch, which would bring opposing traffic to a stop and would prioritize traffic in this direction. Like in this case, we are lined up for the main line, so it's the main line signal that's giving me a clear signal. If the switch was reversed, like so, then the signal for the main line would come to an absolute stop, and the signal for the siding would give me a permissive aspect. And of course, let us not forget the approach signals. In this case, the approach signal is my signal is missing a plate there. It should have a little R here which says restricting. The signal here is restricting because the traffic is lined up in opposite direction for opposed traffic. So let's say the dispatcher would line traffic for the left bound traffic, then my signal here is giving me a permissive aspect because my next signal is a permissive aspect. So in a nutshell, this is how signaling works with CTC. Now for the trains running in this episode, what I'll do is I will have this work train here back out onto the main line and come back onto back over the OS section and onto the main line using signals. Well, there you have it, folks. That about wraps it up for episode number 2. It's been a long episode, a little bit longer than I expected. I had a lot more to say than I thought I would. There will be an episode number 3. It's already in the works, and I know I said that the last time, and it took almost 3 months before I came out with a second episode. There's a reason behind that, and the reason is that I am currently writing a series of articles for the O-Scale Resource magazine. If you want to check out the articles, I'll have the link listed below here if I can. It's a free magazine. It's an online magazine, and the thing is, I had some things in this episode and in the next episode that were part of the articles, and I did not want to compromise the articles. And I also want the videos, the episodes, to be sort of a follow-up, a live follow-up to the articles. So if you read the articles and you like what you see, you can expect that within maybe a month or two, I should have a video on it. So that's one of the reasons why it took so long. My next episode, episode number 3, will be about my workshop that I have upstairs. I have a neat little workshop upstairs, and you can read all about it in the O-Scale Resource, the current issue, which would be March-April issue, I believe. But anyways, next episode will be about the workshop. I also wanted to thank all those of you who subscribed, and I also want to thank you for sending me little messages and leaving little notes. That's really appreciated. It's fun to see that there's somebody out there who's watching and enjoying, and that's my motivation to keep going. So I guess until next time, this is Serge Lebel signing out.